the moment Penelope Vance stepped off the stagecoach in Leadville, Colorado. She knew something had gone terribly wrong, because the man holding the sign with her name wasn't the silver-haired merchant from the photograph tucked in her reticule. It was August 1878, and the thin mountain air made her lightheaded as she clutched her carpetbag, staring at the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy, whose sun-weathered face looked nothing like Mr. Barnaby Sullivan's carefully composed portrait. This man was younger, perhaps 30 at most, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of Colorado spruce. His worn leather vest and dusty boots spoke of hard labor, not the comfortable mercantile life she'd been promised in the letters. "Miss Vance." The cowboy's voice carried a rough edge, like gravel tumbling in a stream. "I'm Sawyer Langston. There's been a situation." Penelope's fingers tightened around her bag's handle. Behind her, the stagecoach driver was already unloading luggage for other passengers. The afternoon sun beat down on Leadville's Main Street, where miners and merchants moved between buildings that still smelled of fresh cut lumber. The town had exploded with the silver boom, growing faster than anyone could have predicted. A situation. She repeated, her Philadelphia accent sounding foreign even to her own ears. "I'm here to meet Mr. Barnaby Sullivan. We're to be married tomorrow." Sawyer shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. He removed his hat, revealing a line where sun-darkened skin met the paler complexion of his forehead. "That's the situation, madam. Barnaby's my neighbor. He lives about 2 miles north of my property. Thing is, he took sick 3 days ago. Real bad. Doc Henderson's been with him round the clock." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Penelope had sold everything she owned in Philadelphia to make this journey. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving debts that swallowed their modest home. Her aunt had offered her a position as an unpaid companion, which was just a polite way of saying servant. The advertisement for a bride had seemed like Providence, and Mr. Sullivan's letters had been kind, promising a partnership in his successful dry goods store. "Is he going to recover?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "Doc thinks so, but it'll be weeks before he's on his feet. Maybe longer." Sawyer gestured down the street. "He asked me to fetch you, see you settled. There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Fletcher. Respectable place. Barnaby said he'd cover your room and board until he's well enough to make proper arrangements." Penelope felt the stares of passers-by. A woman alone was always a spectacle, but a mail-order bride whose groom was too sick to meet her was surely the most scandalous thing to happen in Leadville all week. She lifted her chin, refusing to show the panic clawing at her chest. "That's very kind of Mr. Sullivan," she said carefully. "Perhaps I should visit him, see if there's anything I can do to help with his recovery." Sawyer's expression shifted, something that might have been respect flickering in his green eyes. "Doc's not letting anyone in except for necessary care. Doesn't want whatever Barnaby's got spreading through town, but I'll let him know you're here and willing. He'll appreciate that." He reached for her trunk, which the driver had deposited on the wooden boardwalk. Penelope noticed the easy strength in his movements, the way his shoulders moved beneath his faded blue shirt. "Stop it," she scolded herself. She was promised to another man, even if that man was currently bedridden and unable to meet her. Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house was a 2-story structure painted a cheerful yellow that seemed at odds with the rough mining town surrounding it. Inside, lace curtains and polished wood floors spoke of a woman determined to maintain civilization despite the frontier setting. Mrs. Fletcher herself was a round, motherly woman in her 50s who clucked sympathetically when Sawyer explained the situation. "You poor dear," she said, taking Penelope's hands in her own warm ones. What a terrible welcome to Leadville. But don't you worry, we'll get you sorted. I've got a nice room on the second floor, faces east so you'll get the morning light. Sawyer set down the trunk and turned to leave, but Mrs. Fletcher stopped him. You'll stay for supper, won't you, Sawyer? It's the least we can do, and I know you've got a long ride back to your ranch. I should get back before dark, he said, but his stomach betrayed him with a low rumble that made Penelope smile despite her circumstances. Supper it is then, Mrs. Fletcher declared. 6 o'clock sharp. Now let me show Miss Vance to her room. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a wedding ring quilt and a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and bowl. A single window looked out over the street, where the traffic of the growing town continued its endless flow. Penelope sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of her situation. She was hundreds of miles from everything familiar, about to marry a man she'd never met, who was now too sick to even see her. She had exactly $17 to her name and no way to return east even if she wanted to. The boarding house was generous now, but what would happen if Mr. Sullivan's illness dragged on? Or worse, what if he didn't recover at all? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Mrs. Fletcher peeked in, carrying a pitcher of fresh water. I thought you might want to freshen up before supper. There's soap in the dish and clean towels in the drawer. Thank you, Penelope said. Mrs. Fletcher, may I ask you something about Mr. Sullivan? The older woman set down the pitcher and settled onto the room's single chair. Of course, dear. What kind of man is he? His letters were very proper, but I realized on the journey here that I know very little about him beyond his business and his desire for a wife. Mrs. Fletcher considered the question carefully. Barnaby's a good man, hard-working and honest. He came to Leadville when it was barely more than a mining camp and built his store from nothing. He's well-respected, goes to church on Sundays when he's not too busy with inventory. He's quiet, keeps to himself mostly. She paused, smoothing her apron. He's also 20 years older than you, which I suspect you knew from his letters. Penelope nodded. The age difference hadn't seemed so important in Philadelphia when her choices were between a much older husband or poverty. He'll be a good provider, Mrs. Fletcher continued, and he won't mistreat you, but love, she shook her head gently. That's something you build over time if you're lucky. It was an honest answer, more honest than Penelope had expected. She appreciated it. Supper was served in a dining room where 4 other boarders joined them at a long table. There was a banker named Mr. Pettigrew, a young surveyor called Thomas, and 2 women who worked as seamstresses, Miss Sarah and Miss Catherine. They were all curious about Penelope, but Mrs. Fletcher's stern looks kept their questions reasonably polite. Sawyer arrived exactly at 6, his hair still damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt that looked like he saved it for special occasions. He took the seat across from Penelope and nodded his thanks when Mrs. Fletcher heaped fried chicken and mashed potatoes onto his plate. How's your ranch doing, Sawyer? The banker asked. I heard you lost some cattle to that late spring snow. Lost 4 head, Sawyer confirmed, his jaw tightening, but the rest made it through. Should have a decent herd to take to market come fall. You run cattle? Penelope asked, surprising herself. She'd meant to stay quiet, to observe rather than participate. Sawyer's eyes met hers. Yes, madam. Got 150 acres about 2 miles south of town. Run about 60 head right now, hoping to increase that over the next few years. It's not fancy, but it's honest work. Sawyer's being modest, Thomas the surveyor interjected. He's got one of the better operations in the area. Good water rights, decent grazing land. He built that whole operation from nothing, just like Barnaby built his store. A faint color crept up Sawyer's neck. I've had some luck is all. Luck and hard work, Mrs. Fletcher corrected. and good sense, which is rarer than you might think in these parts. Half the men who come here lose their wages gambling or drinking. Sawyer here saves his money and invests in his future. Penelope found herself curious about this quiet cowboy who seemed embarrassed by praise. "Do you run the ranch alone?" "I've got a hand who helps out, Miguel Ortega. Good man, knows cattle better than anyone I've met. His wife Rosa comes by once a week to help with washing and such. Otherwise, yes, it's mostly just me." "That must be lonely," Penelope said, then immediately wished she hadn't. It seemed too personal, too familiar. But Sawyer didn't seem offended. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but there's a piece to it too, just you and the land and the work that needs doing." He paused, cutting his chicken. "Though I'll admit it'd be nice to have someone to share it with." That's why I was glad when Barnaby said he'd found a bride. Figured maybe it'd encourage me to start looking too. The conversation moved on to town gossip and politics, but Penelope kept finding her gaze drifting back to Sawyer. There was something solid about him, something dependable. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. And unlike many of the men she'd encountered on her journey west, his eyes never made her feel uncomfortable or objectified. After supper, Sawyer stood to leave. "I'll ride into town in a few days, check on how you're settling in," he told Penelope. "And I'll stop by Doc Henderson's, see how Barnaby's doing. Is there anything you'd like me to tell him?" Penelope thought for a moment. "Tell him I hope he recovers quickly, and that I'm grateful for his generosity in providing for my accommodation." "I'll do that." Sawyer settled his hat on his head and nodded to the assembled company. "Mrs. Fletcher, thank you for the fine meal. Miss Vance, welcome to Leadville." Then he was gone, his bootsteps echoing on the porch before fading into the evening sounds of the town. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Penelope helped Mrs. Fletcher with cooking and cleaning to earn her keep, despite the landlady's protests that Barnaby was paying her board. She couldn't sit idle, and the work kept her mind from dwelling on her uncertain future. She learned that Mrs. Fletcher was a widow whose husband had died in a mining accident 2 years prior, and that she'd turned their home into a boarding house to survive. "It's not what I planned, Mrs. Fletcher said as they kneaded bread together. But then, life rarely is. You learn to adapt to find the blessings in unexpected places. On the 4th day, Sawyer returned. Penelope was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard his voice in the kitchen. Her heart did an odd little skip that she tried to ignore as she smoothed her hair and went inside. He was drinking coffee at the kitchen table, his hat on the chair beside him. "Miss Vance," he said, rising when she entered, "I've got news about Barnaby." Her stomach clenched. "Is he worse?" "Actually, he's better. Fever broke yesterday. Doc says he's on the mend, though he's weak as a kitten. He wants to see you if you're willing. Doc says you can visit for a short while as long as you don't tire him out." Relief flooded through her. "Of course. When?" "I can take you now if that suits you. It's a bit of a ride, so you'll want something practical to wear if you've got it." Penelope changed into her most practical dress, a dark green cotton that wouldn't show every speck of dust, and borrowed a bonnet from Mrs. Fletcher. Sawyer had a wagon waiting, which surprised her until he explained that Barnaby's property was accessible by road, unlike his own ranch which required horseback to reach the main house. The ride took about 45 minutes, following a dusty road that climbed into the hills outside Leadville. Sawyer handled the horses with easy competence, his attention mostly on the road but occasionally glancing her way to point out landmarks. "That's my property line there," he said, indicating a split-rail fence. "Runs along the creek for about half a mile. Barnaby's place is just beyond that rise." Barnaby Sullivan's home was a neat frame house with a wide porch, larger than she'd expected. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings. The property spoke of prosperity and careful maintenance. Doc Henderson met them at the door, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and kind eyes. "Keep it short," he instructed. "He's recovering, but he needs rest. And don't be alarmed by how he looks. He's lost some weight, and the illness took a toll." Nothing could have fully prepared Penelope for the sight of her intended husband. Barnaby Sullivan lay propped up on pillows in a large bed, his face gaunt and pale, his silver hair lank against the white linens. But his eyes were alert, and they brightened when she entered the room. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice thin but warm, "forgive me for not rising. I seem to have inconvenienced us both with my poor timing." Penelope approached the bed, unsure of what to do. She settled for taking the chair beside it. "I'm just glad you're recovering, Mr. Sullivan. You gave everyone quite a scare. Please call me Barnaby. We are to be married after all." He studied her face, and she tried not to squirm under the scrutiny. "You're even lovelier than your photograph suggested. I'd worried you might take one look at me like this and flee back to Philadelphia." "I'm made of sterner stuff than that," Penelope said, and was pleased to hear the steadiness in her voice. They talked for about 20 minutes, carefully polite conversation about her journey and her impressions of Leadville. Barnaby was intelligent and well-spoken, his manner courteous. But there was no spark, no connection beyond what might develop between any two strangers making an effort to be pleasant. When Doc Henderson appeared to end the visit, Barnaby reached for Penelope's hand. His fingers were cool and dry, nothing like the calloused warmth of Sawyer's hands when he'd helped her down from the wagon. "I'm sorry to ask this of you," Barnaby said, "but I wonder if you might wait a few more weeks for our wedding. I want to be well enough to stand beside you properly, to begin our life together without this illness hanging over us." "Of course," Penelope agreed. What else could she say? "Take the time you need to recover fully." On the ride back to town, Sawyer was quiet. Penelope watched the landscape roll past, her mind churning with thoughts she couldn't quite organize. "He seems kind," she finally said. "He is." Sawyer's hands were steady on the reins. "He'll take good care of you." "But," Penelope pressed, hearing something in his tone. Sawyer was silent for a long moment. "No buts. Barnaby's a good man. You could do a lot worse. But I could do better." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "I didn't say that." Sawyer's jaw was tight. "It's not my place to say anything at all. You made an agreement with Barnaby, and he'll honor it. So should you." They didn't speak for the rest of the journey. When Sawyer helped her down from the wagon in front of Mrs. Fletcher's, his hands were gentle, but he didn't meet her eyes. "I'll check in again next week," he said, climbing back onto the wagon seat. "Make sure you've got everything you need." Penelope watched him drive away, feeling like she'd broken something fragile without meaning to. The days settled into a routine. Penelope helped Mrs. Fletcher, explored Leadville's growing streets, and tried not to count the hours between Sawyer's visits. He came every few days, always with news of Barnaby's progress, and always maintaining a careful, polite distance that made Penelope want to scream. 2 weeks after her arrival, Mrs. Fletcher suggested she might want to visit Barnaby's store. "It's closed while he's recovering, but you'll be helping run it soon enough. Might be good to familiarize yourself with the inventory and accounts." Barnaby agreed when Sawyer relayed the message and sent a key with his blessing. The store was in the middle of town, a substantial building with Sullivan's Dry Goods painted in neat letters across the front. Inside, it smelled of coffee and leather and new fabric. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to farm implements. Penelope ran her fingers over the bolts of fabric, imagining herself measuring out yards for customers, making change, keeping the books. It was a good life, a secure life. She should be grateful. She was examining the account ledgers when the door opened. Sawyer stepped inside, looking surprised to see her. "Didn't know you'd be here," he said. "I was just going to check that everything was secure." "Barnaby asked you to watch the store too," I offered. "Seemed the neighborly thing to do." He moved further inside, his eyes scanning the shelves. "He's built something impressive here. Started with nothing but a wagon full of goods and a tent back in '76. Now look at it." "You admire him," Penelope observed. "I do. He's proof that a man can make something of himself out here if he's willing to work hard and make smart choices." Sawyer picked up a bridle from a display, examining the stitching. "He'll be a good husband to you." "You keep saying that," Penelope said, frustration bubbling up. "Why do you keep saying that?" Sawyer set down the bridle carefully. "Because it's true. And because we both need to remember it." The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Penelope knew she should step back, should change the subject, should do anything other than what she did next. "What if I don't want to remember it?" The words were barely a whisper. Sawyer's eyes met hers, and she saw in them a longing that matched her own. "Doesn't matter what we want. Your promise to Barnaby. He's counting on you, planning his future around you. And he's my neighbor, my friend. I won't betray him. Even if he and I would both be unhappy." "You don't know that you'd be unhappy," Sawyer said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You barely know him. Maybe once he's well and you're married, you'll find you suit each other just fine. And maybe I won't." Penelope moved closer, driven by something reckless and desperate. "Maybe I'll spend every day wishing I'd been brave enough to choose differently." "Penelope." Her name on his lips sent shivers down her spine. He'd never used her first name before. "This can't happen. I can't be the man who steals another man's bride. That's not who I am." "I know," she said, and she did. It was part of what drew her to him, this fundamental decency that even strong attraction couldn't override. "But I wish things were different. I wish the stagecoach had brought me to your door instead of delivering me to Barnaby." Sawyer reached out, his hand hovering near her face but not quite touching. "So do I," he admitted, his voice rough. "God help me, so do I, but wishing doesn't change what's right." He dropped his hand and stepped back. "I should go, and you should probably avoid being alone with me from now on. We're both only human, and this is harder than it should be." After he left, Penelope sank onto a stool behind the counter and let herself cry. She cried for the life she'd left behind in Philadelphia, for the father she'd lost, for the security she'd thought she was gaining, and the love she'd never expected to find. Most of all, she cried because Sawyer was right. No matter what her heart wanted, she'd made a promise to Barnaby Sullivan, and breaking it would make her the kind of person she didn't want to be. The next 2 weeks were torture. Sawyer stopped coming to town, sending Miguel with messages about Barnaby's progress instead. Miguel was kind and respectful, his English accented but clear. He told Penelope that his boss was working himself too hard, pushing the ranch work from dawn to dusk like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. Barnaby continued to improve. By the end of September, he was able to sit up for extended periods and receive visitors in his parlor instead of his bedroom. Penelope visited twice more, always with Doc Henderson or a neighbor lady in attendance. Barnaby was attentive and pleasant, asking about her interests and sharing his plans for expanding the store. He was exactly what he'd promised to be in his letters. A solid, dependable man ready to provide a comfortable life. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt like she was watching her future unfold from a great distance, as if it were happening to someone else. It was early October when Mrs. Fletcher suggested Penelope might want to start preparing her wedding dress. "Barnaby's almost fully recovered," she said gently. Doc Henderson thinks he'll be ready for a small ceremony by the end of the month. Penelope chose a simple pattern from Peterson's magazine, a cream-colored wool that would be practical for the Colorado climate. Miss Sarah and Miss Catherine offered to help with the sewing, and they spent several evenings together, stitching and chatting. The seamstresses were full of advice about marriage and keeping house, most of it well-meaning if somewhat overwhelming. "The important thing is to remember your partners," Miss Sarah said, threading her needle. "Marriage is work, same as anything else worth having. And don't expect romance like in those novels," Miss Catherine added. "Real life is about companionship and respect, not grand passion." Penelope bent over her stitching, hiding her expression. Grand passion. She'd never even considered such a thing before coming to Colorado. Her parents' marriage had been affectionate but practical, and she'd expected the same. But now, she knew what it felt like to look at someone and feel your heart race, to lie awake at night thinking about the sound of their voice, to wish for things that could never be. The dress was nearly finished when Sawyer finally appeared again. Penelope was in the parlor, hemming the skirt, when Mrs. Fletcher showed him in. He looked thinner, his face drawn, but his eyes still made her pulse quicken. "I came to deliver Barnaby's invitation personally," he said, holding out an envelope. "He wants you to come to dinner tomorrow evening. Says he has something important to discuss." Penelope took the envelope, careful not to let her fingers touch his. "Will you be there?" "Yes. He's invited several neighbors, wants to make a small celebration of his recovery." Sawyer's gaze fell on the wedding dress draped over a chair. Something flickered across his face before he schooled it back to neutrality. "That's fine work. Thank you." Penelope set down her sewing. "Sawyer, I want you to know that I'm going to be a good wife to Barnaby. I'll honor my commitment to him." "I never doubted it." He turned his hat in his hands. "And I want you to know that I'll always be a good neighbor to both of you. What I feel, what we talked about, that ends now. Once you're married, I'll never speak of it again." "But you'll still feel it," Penelope said softly. "Doesn't matter what I feel. What matters is doing right by a good man who's never done me wrong." Sawyer met her eyes. "We both have to let this go, Penelope. There's no other way forward." After he left, Penelope picked up her sewing again, but her vision was too blurred with tears to see the stitches properly. The dinner at Barnaby's house was a larger affair than Penelope had expected. In addition to Sawyer, there were 3 other neighboring ranchers with their wives, Doc Henderson, and the local minister, Reverend Michaels. Barnaby had hired a woman from town to cook, and the dining room table was set with china that must have cost a fortune to transport to Colorado. Barnaby himself looked remarkably recovered, his color back and his movements steady. He greeted Penelope at the door with a warm smile and led her into his parlor, where the other guests were already gathering. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my bride-to-be, Miss Penelope Vance," he announced. "Penelope, these are my friends and neighbors." The ranchers' wives descended on her with friendly curiosity, asking about her journey and her impressions of Colorado. They were kind women, weathered by frontier life but warm in their welcome. Penelope found herself relaxing slightly, thinking that perhaps she could build a life here after all, even without the kind of love she'd glimpsed with Sawyer. Dinner was excellent: roasted beef with vegetables and fresh bread, followed by apple pie. Barnaby was an attentive host, making sure everyone's glasses were filled and conversation flowed smoothly. He sat at the head of the table with Penelope at his right hand, and she tried not to notice that Sawyer was seated directly across from her, his eyes carefully avoiding hers. After the meal, when everyone had retired to the parlor for coffee, Barnaby stood and cleared his throat. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Your friendship and support during my illness meant more than I can say." He glanced at Penelope. And I'm grateful to Penelope for her patience and understanding during what must have been a trying time for her. There were murmurs of agreement and appreciation around the room. Barnaby continued, I asked you all here tonight because I have an announcement to make, and I wanted to do it properly, with witnesses. He turned to face Penelope fully. My dear, I owe you an apology and an explanation. Penelope's heart began to race. Something in his tone warned her that whatever came next would change everything. During my illness, I had a great deal of time to think, Barnaby said. About my life, my choices, and what I truly want for my future. I've built a successful business and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. But I've also been honest enough with myself to admit that I'm set in my ways, comfortable in my solitude. I asked for a bride because I thought it was what a man of my age and station should do, not because I felt a true calling toward marriage. The room had gone very quiet. Penelope could feel everyone's eyes on her. These past weeks, watching you through my window when you didn't know I was looking, seeing how you helped Mrs. Fletcher and explored the town with such determination, I've come to realize something. Barnaby's expression was kind but firm. You deserve more than a marriage of convenience to a man old enough to be your father. You deserve a chance at real happiness, real love. Barnaby, what are you saying? Penelope's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I'm saying I release you from our agreement, Barnaby said gently. With no shame and no hard feelings. You came here in good faith, and I won't hold you to a promise that would make us both settle for less than we deserve. Penelope felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. But I have nowhere else to go. I sold everything to come here. I know, and I've taken that into account. Barnaby gestured to his lawyer, who produced a document. I'm settling a sum of money on you, enough to establish yourself independently if you choose, or to return to Philadelphia if you prefer. Consider it compensation for the disruption to your life and the uncertainty I've caused you. That's too generous, Penelope protested, but Barnaby shook his head. It's only fair, and besides, I can afford it. He smiled slightly. The store does very well. One of the ranchers' wives spoke up. Barnaby, are you sure about this? It's not too late to reconsider. I'm certain, Barnaby said. More certain than I've been about anything in a long time. His gaze moved to Sawyer, who sat frozen in his chair. And I believe I'm not the only one who will benefit from this decision. Sawyer's face went pale, then flushed. Barnaby, I know you didn't, Barnaby interrupted. You're a man of honor, Sawyer, and so is she a woman of honor. That's precisely why I'm doing this. You've both been trying so hard to do the right thing that you've been making yourselves miserable. I may be older and set in my ways, but I'm not blind. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Penelope felt heat flood her face, mortification mixing with a desperate hope she was afraid to acknowledge. Barnaby held up his hand for quiet. I'm not going to make this more difficult by dragging it out. Sawyer, you need a wife who will make that ranch of yours into a real home. Penelope, you need a husband who looks at you like you're the answer to every prayer he's ever prayed. I don't need a wife, not really. What I need is the satisfaction of knowing I did right by two good people. Sawyer stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Barnaby, this is too much. I can't accept charity, and I won't take what's meant for you. It's not charity, it's common sense, Barnaby replied. And she was never really meant for me. I think we all know that now. He looked at Penelope. The question is, what do you want, my dear? Every eye in the room turned to Penelope. She could hardly breathe, hardly think. Everything had changed so suddenly. The future she'd been resignedly accepting replaced with possibilities she'd tried not to dream about. She looked at Sawyer, really looked at him, and saw in his face everything she'd been feeling, fear and hope and longing all mixed together. I want, she began, then had to stop and steady her voice. I want to choose my own future. And if I'm being honest, if I'm being brave, I want that future to include Sawyer if he'll have me. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sawyer crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. If I'll have you. His voice was rough with emotion. Penelope, I've been half out of my mind these past weeks trying not to want you, trying to be honorable and decent and ignore everything my heart was telling me. If you're truly free, if this is real, then yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He took her hands in his, and the rightness of it made Penelope want to cry. This was what touch was supposed to feel like, what connection was supposed to feel like. Well then, Barnaby said, sounding satisfied. Reverend Michaels, I believe you may have a wedding to perform after all. Just not the one we originally planned. The room burst into laughter and conversation. The ranchers clapped Sawyer on the back while their wives embraced Penelope, everyone talking at once about what a romantic turn of events it was. Doc Henderson approached Barnaby with a bemused expression. You planned this whole thing, didn't you? The dinner, the witnesses, the dramatic announcement, I wanted it done properly, Barnaby admitted, with no room for gossip or speculation about anyone's character. Now, everyone knows that Penelope and I were never truly engaged, that I released her freely, and that there's no scandal in her choosing Sawyer. You're a good man, Barnaby Sullivan, Doc said. I'm a practical man, Barnaby corrected. And I recognize true feeling when I see it, even if I've never experienced it myself. Across the room, Sawyer still held Penelope's hands. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. It's going to be hard work, ranch life. Early mornings and late nights and nothing like the comfort Barnaby could have given you. I don't want comfort, Penelope said. I want a life that means something, work that matters, and someone who sees me as a partner, not just a convenience. She squeezed his hands. I want you, Sawyer. Just as you are, ranch work and all. Then you have me, he said simply, for as long as you'll keep me. How about forever? Penelope suggested, and watched his face break into the first truly unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him. Forever sounds just about right. Reverend Michaels suggested they wait at least a few weeks before the wedding, to make sure they were certain and to give Penelope time to adjust to her changed circumstances. But Sawyer shook his head. With all due respect, Reverend, I've waited long enough. If Penelope's willing, I'd like to marry her as soon as possible. Tomorrow, Penelope said, surprising herself with her boldness. I've already got a wedding dress finished. Why wait? The Reverend looked between them and laughed. Young love, very well, tomorrow afternoon. But I expect you both to show up clear-headed and certain. We will be, Sawyer promised. The party broke up shortly after, with everyone promising to attend the wedding the next day. Barnaby pulled Penelope aside before she left. I hope you don't think poorly of me for how I handled this, he said. I should have been honest with you from the beginning, should have realized sooner that my heart wasn't truly in it. I think you're one of the kindest men I've ever met, Penelope said honestly. You could have held me to our agreement and I would have honored it. Instead, you gave me a chance at real happiness. How could I think poorly of that? You'll visit sometimes, Barnaby asked. Once you're settled at the ranch, I'd like to maintain our friendship if that's not too awkward. I'd like that very much, Penelope assured him. Sawyer drove her back to Mrs. Fletcher's in his wagon, the October night cool and clear above them. The stars seemed brighter than they ever had in Philadelphia, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. I can't quite believe this is real, Penelope admitted. This morning I was preparing to marry a man I barely knew and resign myself to a comfortable but loveless life. Tonight, I'm engaged to the man I've been trying not to fall in love with for weeks. You've been falling in love with me. Sawyer asked, pleasure clear in his voice. Desperately, Penelope confessed. Since the first day, if I'm honest. The way you handled everything so carefully, trying so hard to do right by both me and Barnaby. Your kindness and your strength and the way you look at me like I matter. You do matter, Sawyer said, more than anything. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of Mrs. Fletcher's. I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. Sawyer, Penelope touched his arm, stopping him from climbing down. Are you nervous? About tomorrow, about marrying someone you've only known a few weeks. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. Not even a little bit. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're what's been missing, Penelope. I didn't even realize how empty my life was until you arrived in it. She leaned forward and kissed him, a brief, sweet pressure of lips that promised everything to come. He responded gently, his hand coming up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. When they parted, both were breathless. Tomorrow can't come soon enough, Penelope whispered. Tomorrow, Sawyer agreed. And then every tomorrow after that. Mrs. Fletcher was waiting up when Penelope came inside, and she immediately noticed the change in her boarder's expression. Well, she demanded, don't keep me in suspense. What happened at Barnaby's dinner? Penelope told her everything, watching the landlady's face go through a range of expressions from shock to understanding to delight. I knew it, Mrs. Fletcher said triumphantly. I told my late husband, if he'd lived to see it, that you and Sawyer were meant for each other. The way you both tried so hard not to notice each other was proof enough. We're getting married tomorrow, Penelope said, and saying it out loud made it feel even more real. Will you stand up with me? I don't have family here, and I'd be honored if you'd act as my witness. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes grew bright with tears. Oh, my dear girl, I'd be delighted. She pulled Penelope into a warm embrace. Your father would be proud of you, you know. Coming all this way, being brave enough to choose your own path when the opportunity presented itself. That night, Penelope lay in bed in her small room, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow she would marry Sawyer Langston, become a rancher's wife, start a completely different life than anything she'd imagined. It should have been terrifying, and perhaps it was, a little. But more than fear, she felt anticipation, eagerness to begin this new chapter. The next day dawned clear and bright, perfect October weather. Miss Sarah and Miss Catherine came early to help Penelope dress, their faces alight with romantic pleasure at the turn of events. It's like something out of a novel, Miss Catherine sighed, doing up the tiny buttons on Penelope's dress. The mail-order bride who was meant for one man but destined for another. Except better, because it's real, Miss Sarah added. She adjusted Penelope's hair, which they'd arranged in soft waves held back with pins. You look beautiful, dear. Sawyer's a lucky man. I'm the lucky one, Penelope said, meaning it. The wedding was held in Reverend Michaels's small church, a plain wooden structure that served Leadville's growing faithful population. Despite the short notice, it seemed half the town had turned out. News traveled fast in a place like this, and the romantic story of the mail-order bride and the honorable cowboy had captured everyone's imagination. Barnaby was there, seated in the front row and looking genuinely pleased. Miguel Ortega and his wife Rosa sat nearby, Miguel grinning broadly. The neighboring ranchers and their wives filled several pews, along with Mrs. Fletcher's other boarders and what seemed like a fair portion of Leadville's shopkeepers and miners. But Penelope only had eyes for Sawyer, who stood at the front of the church in a new suit that must have cost him dearly. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and his eyes held such love and promise that her heart felt like it might burst. She walked down the aisle on Mrs. Fletcher's arm, and when Sawyer took her hands, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Reverend Michaels kept the ceremony simple but heartfelt. When it came time for vows, Sawyer's voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and be faithful to you all the days of my life. I promise to build a home with you, to share the work and the joy, the hard times and the good. I promise to see you, really see you, and cherish everything you are." Penelope's vows were equally sincere. "I promise to stand beside you as your partner and your friend. I promise to work hard and laugh often and face whatever comes with courage. I promise to choose you every single day for the rest of my life." When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Sawyer's kiss was gentle but unmistakable in its promise. The church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, where she'd somehow managed to prepare a feast despite the short notice. There was roasted chicken and fresh bread, vegetables from the local gardens, and 3 different kinds of pie. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon there was dancing in the parlor and spilling out onto the front porch. Barnaby approached the newlyweds during a lull in the music. "I wanted to give you my gift personally," he said, handing Sawyer an envelope. Inside was a deed to 20 acres of prime grazing land that bordered Sawyer's property. Sawyer stared at it in shock. "Barnaby, this is too much. I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Barnaby said firmly. "Consider it a wedding present and an investment in good neighbors. Besides, I inherited that land in a debt settlement and have no use for it. Better it goes to someone who'll make good use of it." "Thank you," Sawyer said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For this, for yesterday, for being the kind of man who puts others before himself." "Just be happy," Barnaby replied. "Both of you. That's thanks enough." As the afternoon wore into evening, Penelope found herself dancing with Sawyer in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor, surrounded by well-wishers and new friends. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the twists and turns that had seemed like disasters at the time. If her father hadn't died, if she hadn't been desperate enough to answer a mail-order bride advertisement, if Barnaby hadn't gotten sick, if Sawyer hadn't been the one to meet her at the stagecoach, if any one of 100 small moments had gone differently, she wouldn't be here now. She wouldn't be in the arms of a man who loved her, surrounded by a community that had welcomed her, about to start a life that felt full of purpose and possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Sawyer asked, pulling her a little closer. "How grateful I am for all the accidents and coincidences that brought me to you," Penelope said. "I don't think they were accidents," Sawyer replied. "I think maybe fate knew what it was doing when it brought you to my door instead of Barnaby's." "Our door now," Penelope corrected, and loved the way Sawyer's face lit up at the words. They left the party as the sun was setting, riding in Sawyer's wagon toward the ranch that was now her home. Penelope had said her goodbyes to Mrs. Fletcher, promising to visit often, and had thanked everyone for their kindness and welcome. The ride to the ranch took about an hour, following the road out of Leadville and then turning onto a smaller track that wound through pine-covered hills. As they crested a rise, Sawyer pointed ahead. "There, that's home." The ranch house was smaller than Barnaby's, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it stood a barn and corrals, and beyond that, pastures rolled away toward the mountains. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lantern light glowed in the windows. "Rosa came out to prepare things for us," Sawyer explained. "She insisted, said a bride deserves to come home to a clean house and a hot meal." Inside, the house was simple but welcoming. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room with a large fireplace dominating one wall. A hallway led to what Sawyer explained were 2 bedrooms and a small storage room. "It's not fancy," he said, suddenly looking nervous. Not like what Barnaby could have given you. It's perfect, Penelope said honestly. The furniture was rough but sturdy, made by hand. Colorful rag rugs covered the plank floors and curtains hung at the windows. Someone, probably Rosa, had put wildflowers in a jar on the table. It's a real home, Sawyer. Our home. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I'm going to work hard to make you happy, he promised. To give you a good life here. You already make me happy, Penelope said, just by being exactly who you are. They ate the supper Rosa had left warming by the fire, suddenly ravenous after the excitement of the day. Afterward, Sawyer showed Penelope around the house, pointing out where things were kept and explaining the daily routines of ranch life. Miguel comes by most days to help with the cattle and heavy work, he said. Rosa usually comes on Mondays to help with washing, but she said she'll wait a few weeks, give you time to settle in and decide how you want to handle things. I want to learn everything, Penelope said. I know I don't know anything about ranch life yet, but I'm a quick learner. I want to be a real partner in this, not just someone who keeps house while you do all the real work. Sawyer's expression grew tender. You're already a real partner, but yes, I'll teach you everything I know. About the cattle, the land, how everything works. We'll figure it out together. That first night in their home, lying in Sawyer's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, Penelope felt a peace she'd never known before. This was where she belonged, with this man in this place. Not because it was her only option or her best option, but because it was the choice her heart had made. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Sawyer replied, his voice warm against her hair. Thank you for taking a chance on me on this life. Thank you for being worth the chance, Penelope said. The next weeks were a whirlwind of learning and adjustment. Sawyer was patient as he taught Penelope about ranch life, showing her how to feed the chickens, gather eggs, milk the cow, and tend the kitchen garden that Rosa had helped establish. She learned which pastures held which cattle, how to spot signs of sickness in the herd, and how to keep the account books that tracked their expenses and income. Miguel became a good friend, his quiet competence and gentle humor making every day a pleasure. Rosa visited often, teaching Penelope how to cook the food Sawyer loved and sharing stories about raising her own family on the frontier. It is hard sometimes, Rosa admitted one Monday as they worked together preparing tamales. The loneliness, the work, the worry when the weather turns bad or the cattle get sick. But when you have love, real love, it makes everything else bearable. Penelope looked out the window to where Sawyer and Miguel were mending fence, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. I never expected to find this, she confessed. When I left Philadelphia, I was just trying to survive, to find a stable situation. I never dreamed I'd find actual happiness. Sometimes the best things come when we are not looking for them, Rosa said wisely. As autumn deepened into winter, Penelope discovered she had a knack for ranch management. She reorganized the account books, making them clearer and easier to track. She started a breeding program for the chickens, selecting the best layers. She even suggested improvements to the barn layout that Miguel agreed would make the work more efficient. You're a natural, Sawyer said one evening as they reviewed the accounts together. Look at this. You found 3 places where we were spending more than we needed to, and your idea about selling eggs in town is bringing in steady extra income. I like having something to contribute, Penelope said. I like feeling useful and needed. You're more than useful, Sawyer assured her. You've turned this place into a real home. Before you, it was just a place I worked and slept. Now it's somewhere I look forward to coming back to at the end of every day. In November, the first real snow came, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Sawyer taught Penelope how to navigate the winter challenges, how to break ice on the water troughs, how to ensure the cattle had enough feed, how to conserve fuel and food during the months when travel to town might be difficult. They visited Leadville once a week when weather permitted, stopping to see Mrs. Fletcher and pick up supplies at Barnaby's store, which had reopened with Barnaby in full health. He always greeted them warmly, genuinely pleased to see their happiness. "You're glowing," he told Penelope one December afternoon. "Ranch life clearly agrees with you." "It does," Penelope agreed, "though I'll confess I had no idea how much work it would be. By evening I'm exhausted." "But happy," Barnaby observed. "That's the difference. You're tired from work you find meaningful, alongside someone you love. That's the best kind of tired there is." Christmas was a revelation. Penelope had worried they'd spend it alone, isolated by snow and distance, but Sawyer had other plans. They hosted Miguel and Rosa and their 3 children, along with 2 neighboring ranching families. The little house was packed to bursting, filled with laughter and music, and the smells of cooking food. Sawyer had secretly commissioned a rocking chair from the town carpenter as Penelope's Christmas gift. It was made of smooth pine, perfectly sized for her, with her initials carved into the back. "For when you want to sit by the fire and read," he explained. "Or for rocking babies someday, if we're blessed with them." Penelope's gift to him was a new winter coat she'd sewn herself, lined with wool and reinforced at the shoulders and elbows. "So you'll stay warm when you're out working," she said. "I can't bear the thought of you being cold." "I love it," Sawyer said, pulling it on. "It fit perfectly. You made this yourself." Rosa helped with the pattern, but yes, every stitch. He kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they had a house full of guests. "Best Christmas I've ever had," he declared. Winter passed into spring, and with the warming weather came new challenges and new joys. 2 of their cows gave birth to healthy calves, increasing their herd. The chickens started laying prolifically, and Penelope's egg sales in town became a reliable income stream. In April, Penelope realized she'd missed her monthly courses. Rosa confirmed what she suspected, her experienced eyes taking in Penelope's symptoms with knowing certainty. "You are with child," she said, smiling. "Probably due in late October or early November. Congratulations, my Hija." Penelope could barely contain her excitement until Sawyer came in from the day's work. She met him at the door, unable to keep the news to herself a moment longer. "I'm pregnant," she blurted out. "We're going to have a baby." Sawyer's face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, joy, and finally settling on pure elation. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around before carefully setting her down again. "A baby," he repeated as if testing the words. "We're going to be parents. Are you happy?" Penelope asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Sawyer said. "Penelope, you've given me everything. A home, a partnership, love, and now a child. I'm the most blessed man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer. Penelope continued her ranch work, though Sawyer became increasingly protective, insisting she avoid heavy lifting and take afternoon rests. Miguel and Rosa conspired with him, gently steering her toward lighter tasks despite her protests. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she argued. "Women have been having babies and working for thousands of years." "Not my wife carrying my baby," Sawyer said stubbornly. "Humor me, Penelope. Let me take care of you." She relented, touched by his concern even when it felt excessive. And truth be told, as summer heat gave way to autumn cool and her belly swelled with their growing child, she was grateful for the reduced workload. In October, nearly a year to the day after her arrival in Leadville, Penelope went into labor. Rosa arrived to attend her, along with Mrs. Fletcher, who had insisted on being present. Doc Henderson stood by in case of complications, though Rosa assured everyone she'd delivered dozens of healthy babies. Labor was harder than Penelope had anticipated, hours of pain that tested her endurance. But every time she thought she couldn't bear another moment, she'd see Sawyer's face, pale with worry but trying to be strong for her, and she'd find new reserves of strength at dawn as the first light touched the mountains. Their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry that filled the house, announcing his arrival with unmistakable vigor. "A boy," Rosa announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Penelope's chest. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Sawyer knelt beside the bed, his eyes bright with tears as he looked at his wife and newborn son. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're perfect. Thank you, Penelope. Thank you for everything." They named him Samuel Langston after Penelope's father. He had a thick thatch of dark hair like Sawyer's and eyes that would eventually settle into the same green. From the beginning, he was a content baby, nursing well and sleeping in stretches that allowed Penelope to recover her strength. The ranch took on new rhythms with a baby in residence. Miguel and Rosa's children were delighted to have a baby to fuss over. Mrs. Fletcher visited regularly, bringing gifts and offering advice. Even Barnaby came by once, presenting a silver rattle that had belonged to his own father. "For young Samuel," he said, letting the baby grip his finger with surprising strength. "May he grow up knowing he's loved and wanted." "He already does," Sawyer assured him. As November turned to December, and Samuel's first Christmas approached, Penelope reflected on the incredible journey of the past year. She'd arrived in Colorado expecting one life, and had found something entirely different and infinitely better. On Christmas Eve, with Samuel sleeping in his cradle by the fire and Sawyer's arm around her shoulders, Penelope felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking about?" Sawyer asked, the question that had become familiar between them. "About fate," Penelope said. "About how the stagecoach was supposed to bring me to Barnaby's door, but instead it brought me to yours. About how what seemed like a mistake was actually the best thing that ever happened to me." "To both of us," Sawyer corrected. He kissed her temple. "I used to think I was content alone, that all I needed was the ranch and honest work. You showed me what I was missing. You made me understand what home really means." Samuel stirred in his sleep, one tiny fist stretching above his head. They both watched him, marveling as they still did at this life they'd created together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone as planned?" Penelope asked. "If Barnaby hadn't gotten sick, if you just delivered me to his door and ridden away?" "Sometimes," Sawyer admitted. "And then I realized there's no point wondering because this is how things were meant to be. You were meant for me and I for you. The rest was just fate working out the details." "I love you," Penelope said, the words that had become as natural as breathing. "I love you too," Sawyer replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, growing from 60 head of cattle to over 100. They added more chickens, a few pigs, and even some sheep, diversifying in ways that provided stability through market fluctuations. Samuel grew into a sturdy, bright boy who loved following his father around the ranch, mimicking Sawyer's walk and trying to help with every task. When he was 3, Penelope gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who brought new chaos and joy to the household. Miguel and Rosa became like family, their children growing up alongside the Langston children. When Miguel decided to start his own small ranch on land he'd saved for years to buy, Sawyer helped him get established, repaying the loyalty and friendship Miguel had shown him. Barnaby remained a good friend and neighbor. He never married, seeming content with his store and his solitary life, but he doted on the Langston children like an indulgent uncle. On Samuel's 10th birthday, he gave the boy his first real pocketknife, earning Penelope's mock stern warning about safety and Sawyer's grin of male understanding. Mrs. Fletcher eventually retired from running the boarding house, selling it to a young couple and moving into a small cottage where she enjoyed gardening and hosting frequent visits from Penelope and the children. She became Grandmother Fletcher to them, the honorary family she'd never had of her own. The ranch house expanded over time. Sawyer added 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor, giving them space to grow and to host the gatherings that became regular features of their life. Neighbors came for barn raisings and harvest celebrations. The house was always full of life and laughter. When Samuel turned 18, tall and strong like his father, he announced his intention to stay on the ranch rather than seek his fortune elsewhere. Sawyer couldn't have been more proud. "This land is in your blood now," he told his son. "Someday it'll be yours to steward and pass on." The twins, meanwhile, surprised everyone by developing a talent for business that rivaled their mother's. They started raising and selling specialty chickens, their breeds in demand throughout Colorado. By the time they were 20, they were making serious money and drawing attention from young men throughout the territory. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Sawyer and Penelope stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their children were grown now, Samuel married with a baby on the way, the twins courting respectable young men from Leadville. The ranch was thriving, their lives full beyond anything they could have imagined that day in 1878 when Penelope stepped off the stagecoach. "You have any regrets?" Sawyer asked, pulling Penelope close. They were both graying now, laugh lines deep around their eyes, hands weathered from years of work. "Not a single one," Penelope said honestly. "This life, this ranch, our children, it's everything I never knew I wanted. Even though it wasn't what you came here for." "Especially because it wasn't what I came here for," Penelope corrected. "What I came here for was safety and security. What I found was love and purpose, and a partnership that made every day an adventure." Sawyer turned her to face him, his green eyes still able to make her heart race after all these years. "I fall more in love with you every single day," he said. "You know that, don't you?" "I know," Penelope replied, touching his weathered face. "Because I feel the same way about you." They stood together in the fading light. 2 people who had found each other through accident and fate, who had built a life together through love and hard work, who had created something lasting and real out of what had started as a simple mistake. The mail-order bride had been meant for his neighbor, but fate had brought her to his door instead. And in doing so, fate had given them both exactly what they needed, even if they hadn't known they needed it at the time. Inside the house, they could hear their family gathering for dinner, grandchildren's laughter mixing with adult voices. The ranch stretched around them, land they'd worked and loved and would pass on to future generations. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had shone on that first night when Penelope had ridden from town to the ranch as Sawyer's brand new wife. Everything had led to this moment, to this life, to this perfect sense of being exactly where they belonged. The mistakes and miracles, the sickness and health, the hard work and sweet rewards, had all woven together into a story neither of them would change even if they could. "Come on," Penelope said, taking Sawyer's hand. "Our family's waiting." "Our family," Sawyer repeated, savoring the words. "I never get tired of hearing that." They walked inside together, closing the door on the Colorado night, stepping into the warmth and light of the home they'd built, the life they'd created, and the love that had sustained them through it all. The mail-order bride who had arrived in Leadville all those years ago, uncertain and afraid, had found her true home not in the security she'd sought, but in the love she'd never expected. And the lonely cowboy who had reluctantly agreed to fetch his neighbor's bride had discovered that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. Their story had begun with a twist of fate, a case of mistaken destination that had seemed like a disaster at the time. But it had led to 25 years of marriage, 3 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, and a love that only grew stronger with each passing year. As they sat down to dinner surrounded by their family, Sawyer caught Penelope's eye across the table and smiled. She smiled back, a whole conversation passing between them in that single glance. A thank you for every day, every choice, every moment that had brought them here. A promise for all the days still to come. Outside, the Colorado stars shone bright over the ranch that had become their kingdom, the land they'd tamed and loved and made their own. Inside, laughter and love filled every corner of the house, a testament to what 2 people could build when fate and choice and love all aligned. The mail-order bride had found her home. The lonely cowboy had found his heart. And together, they had found everything that mattered. Their story had started with an ending, the end of Penelope's old life and the dissolution of her intended marriage. But it had transformed into a beginning, the first chapter of something beautiful and lasting and true. A love story written in the Wild West, as real and enduring as the mountains themselves. And they lived the rest of their days in happiness, surrounded by family and love, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the wrong door is exactly the right one, and that fate has a way of knowing what we need even when we don't know ourselves.